Right. Hello. Okay, so today we're looking at how we can use carbon paper. We've been looking previously using tracing paper, but obviously when you're working with tracing paper, you're working very much on the paper. So you might not want to draw on that long term, or it might not suit every medium that you want to draw with. So what I've got here is a photograph of a very glamorous older woman that I'm going to draw today. Whatever photograph you've chosen to draw, you can treat it in exactly the same way as this. As I'm going to treat this one. Then I've got a piece of carbon paper. Some of you may remember carbon paper for when it was back in the day. This is going back a bit. This is pre-internet, pre-everything digital kind of technology. This was when you had a manual typewriter that would thwack metal keys against a ribbon to create a text on a page. And it does feel strange to consider that I need to explain how that worked and what it was to some people, but many people, a lot, have never seen a manual typewriter. And the carbon paper you would put in between your masterpiece and another piece of paper, so you could type two whole copies at once. So yes, it was a great innovation. But what it does is it presses a line of graphite line onto the paper below. So below here, I've just got my ordinary drawing paper. You will have to press quite hard to get a line to come through, but I'm going to be just using a B pencil. Something like a fine knitting needle is really quite good. You want something that's firm, that's going to give you a strong line. I'm just going to do a little test and let's see what sort of line we're getting out and whether we can see it. So I'm just going to do a little scribble up in the corner there. And if I raise that paper up, there you go, you can see there's a black X there, which I did. So I'm getting quite a good mark through there. It's always worth having an experiment before you dive straight in. So again, what we're trying to do here is to map out the main proportions of a face so that when we come to doing the shading and so forth, we're not worrying if we've got things in the right place. It's because we're trying to build up confidence gradually, tackling more and more complicated subjects. And as I've said before, and I will say again, this is a process. It's a process of teaching your hand and eyes the basics of facial structure. Going over the image with a pencil not only transfers it onto paper, but it forces you to look really hard at your subject and to actually experience the relationships between the elements of the face. So it's not just, I know the subject of this course is kind of cheating at portraits. It's not a cheat in the sense that it's doing it for you. It's a tool to help you learn. And the more you do these sort of things, the more you give yourself time to do exercises, the more your brain, eye, and hand will learn the rhythm of human faces and how to put them together. And gradually you will see an improvement when you come to sketch things freehand. So what we want to look for are the main areas of shape and the main areas of structure in the face. So the obvious place to start, as they're quite easy to see, is her eyes. So I'm just going to draw in, hopefully, the oval, sort of an oval, isn't it? Or the marquisite shape where her eye comes, and put in her pupil. And you should see, just by looking close into this, that the pupil takes up most of the eye space. You don't see a lot of white around someone's eyes unless they're very surprised or looking into a very strong light. So it's always worth thinking about that when you come to drawing freehand. And you can then work out roughly where the second eye is. There's a lot of tone here, so you might just feel more confident putting in the inside sweep of the right iris, where you can definitely see that. Then always think about how an eye is a ball inside a hole. So you can see here on the eyelid, you get this line of shadow here, and this is where the socket of the eye is. And then the upper eyelid that's actually over the eyeball is protruding out of the face because it's wrapped around her eye. So that catches more light than the space up here. And that's a very strong feature that we often see, we can see quite easily. So let's put that in on both sides. Let's mark that through. So you've got the both lines on each side. When you're doing eyes on people, because there's two of them and they're generally very similar, even if there are subtle differences, I always think it's best to kind of do each stage on each eye, one in turn, rather than doing all of one eye and then coming to the other one, because you kind of can forget what you've done and then you sort of lose track and you can sort of get a bit confused. So then I'm going to mark in an eyebrow. Eyebrows are very strong definers of the face because they come on that bridge, that brow of the forehead where the brow bone is sticking out. We've got then up here, we've got forehead space. So this is defined for us by where her hair is falling. So I'm going to trace down that edge of hair. It's quite a useful guide point. And same on this side, I'm going to trace her hairline and where her hair is joining her face again. Don't worry if it's got hair stranding across her face. It's quite useful that to help sort of locate where everything's going to be. Now, nose wise, I want to mark in, what I'm going to do is kind of like like a half moon or sort of like a horseshoe shape just around where I see the end of her nose, because most people's noses are actually made up, if you look at them, as of like three little spheres. You've got a sphere on top where the nose is, then you've got a sphere either side for the nostrils. So we'll mark the dark of the nostril in the actual nostril hole, and then you can mark in the sort of shape of this around the side of her nostrils too. When I say sphere, it's quite a rough shape, but if you roughly think of it as three balls in a little triangle, that kind of gives you the feel of what that shape is doing. Then mouth wise, upper lips always tend to be stronger looking because they're usually shadowed. So we can draw in that upper lip line, and you almost don't see the lower lip at all. It's mostly just exists in shadow. So you can just put in the edge of that shadow. She's got a thinner lower lip because she's older. So it's important to kind of consider that and get that in, because otherwise it's going to make her look not her correct age. And then we've got this sort of chin. Now, where you've got the chin line, you have sort of a pool of shadow, which is sort of transferring across. So it might be, to begin with, I can see a more definite jaw shape coming in here. I might just put in like an oval that comes in underneath that lower lip shadow and kind of into that underneath, and that's kind of the chin shape. And you will see that chins are these kind of egg shapes sticking forward front on. We've also got this area because your mouth tends to be protruding again because it's coming over the teeth of your upper jaw. So we've got a shape here either side where we've got that sort of line of shadow off to the side each way. Then this bit is much more high lit because, again, you can see the light's coming down, it's catching on here. You might want to put in that just a touch. She's not got a very deep fulcrum, which is that in there, but it's a little line to show where that comes. And then we can think about maybe just a few marks to show roughly where the cheekbones are coming in. Then under here, I'm going to give a little hint of jawline. I've got her neck. Now, as she's an older person, she has, like so many of us, is starting to have wrinkles in her neck. So again, it's quite useful because you can use those strong lines that nature's given her just to sort of define where that neck area comes. It's going to be quite dark. Eventually, we'll kind of disappear them in. Then mine has this jacket edge coming around here. Now, you're going to have similar areas of the face, even if your image is completely different. So think about, where is that oval coming? If you're drawing somebody with a beard, if you can, try and imagine just sort of like moving the beard off and sort of seeing again where that sort of jawline comes. I'm going to continue up here. I want to just then get in some arcs to show kind of where her hairline is coming. So let's just bring some lines coming through here just to show kind of where that hair is, and the same on this side, because hair is a very big signifier in shape and style and sort of very reminiscent of the person you're trying to draw, because this is why if your best friend gets their hair done and they come to meet you, you can completely not recognize them until they're almost on top of you, because they've changed their hair and they suddenly look very different. So, and then she's got a plait going down here, which I may or may not go into. So whoop, that's because I had to use oldie masking tape, recycling it, and it's a bit. So let's just have a look and check on my carbon copy. So I've got some lines, some guidelines to kind of work on for that face that are coming through. We don't need to do a lot more than that with the carbon. It's going to just be a kind of structure. We're going to try and soften it. Now, obviously, don't get rid of your source photo at all. It needs to be right in front of you, ideally, sort of like right next to your piece of work here, so you can get a sense of where you're looking. It's always important, you know, don't feel that you have to make anything up. All the answers of what you're looking at are on your paper here or on the image beside you. So keep on referring to it, because it's that that's going to give you the shape and the face that you want. That's what you're trying to achieve. Right, so the first thing you can see is that her eyes are quite a little bit different in size. That's actually completely what's there. So don't worry about that, because everyone's faces are slightly asymmetrical. They are not going to be symmetrical. So don't try and even them up, because you'll actually stop them looking like the person you want them to look at. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to use a mid-tone, a fairly light area of shading, but I'm going to quite roughly and quite quickly shade in the darker areas that I can see in, but I'm not going to go too dark. I'm going to stay light-ish because I'm going to work on top and build up tone. So I just want to very lightly, if you're not sure how to sort of sit, if you've got a piece of tracing paper to hand, you can put that over her face to reduce the detail and turn it into areas of shadow, or you can kind of half close your eyes and kind of squint at through her eyelashes. So through your eyelashes, even not her eyelashes. So I'm just going to put in a bank of shadow that I can roughly see in. So she's coming in. I'm not trying to be adding definition at the moment. I'm just thinking, is it shadow? In that case, I'm going to shade it. Don't worry about the tonal differences at the moment. Just get in the areas of shadow where you see shadow. If you think it's light, leave it bright. That's a little poem, isn't it? But I'm just going to leave that as being, so I'm just trying to see the area of shadow. If you go over a bit, like here, I've gone over a bit too much, a bit too close to her eyebrow. And I think that needs to be a bit brighter in feel. You can get a little eraser and just take it off. So you just put that little bit of that bit of lightness back in. But that's why I say don't go too strong to begin with. Just put in this sort of mid-tone shading just roughly everywhere, because if you go for a mid-tone, and it should be quite light, really, sort of light to mid-tone, you can always go darker, you know, and you can go bright, you can go a little bit lighter as well. But we're just going to start just putting that in. Eyeballs, irises and pupils go in as well, because they're part of the shading. Again, just do it as a kind of mid-tone disc, because you're going to darken that up later. I can see a little bit on a hairline. Obviously, you'll probably be using your own image, so think about where the areas of shadow are coming in your image. Think about my lady, she's got a little bit across the bridge of her nose, so you can put that in. It should be quite a universal, almost flat, almost like the poster images that we were looking at last week, which is another reason why we were looking at them, just to try and break that down to very sort of simple shapes. Then with her nose, I've got a little bit of shadow coming into that bubble, so you might have a bit more shadow, but just try and see that shape. Just basically all of the end of that nose is going to be shaded in, depending on the profile. If your face is more front on, then you might have less shadow. There's that very strong shadow I can see under her lip there, so that comes in into the kind of chin area. And then we've got this dark section under here, so I'm just going to just sort of sketch that in. We're going to go darker on here. We can always take out lines as well if we decide they're in the wrong place, but I just want to block in that sort of shadow there, so that's definitely becoming darker. Just going to take all that, and I can just sort of get a little bit of shadow along her jawline. Then if I'm looking here, there's a little bit on her lip up there, and then you can see the cheekbone. That's all kind of got to come into shadow, so let's just get that in. I say we're going to refine it as we go, so we're just starting with those areas in, and again on this side, just building up that sort of shadow. As far as hair goes, try and see the shapes of shadow in it. The one I'm using, she's got some nice kind of oval shapes of shadow, and then there's a dark area of shadow kind of where it falls into her ponytail. Try and see it as bits of shadow before worrying about the texture. Texture will come later. Imagine that it's almost like a single flowing bit of fabric or something that, you know, you're just kind of seeing again as areas of shadow and light. So again, here there's a bit of shadow coming into her hair. It's always worth keeping up with the hair, as it were, keeping it going, because it adds a huge amount to volume to someone's head. There's an awful lot of hair on most people's head, unless you've chosen a completely bald subject, of course, which you're totally at liberty to do so, in which case you'll be looking at the tones and the planes of shadow on the head of the person that you're drawing. in the same kind of way. So your shading would extend up into that sort of bald head. So hopefully that's given us sort of like a feel of some of the areas of shadow. And then straight away, now that we've got some of that in, then we can start thinking, right, okay, so definitely we need to darken up around, let's start off with the crease into the brow bone there. So that's definitely going to darken up behind there. Have a look and see, usually the eyelid has a darker corner, depending on where your shadow falls and where it comes. I've got quite a nice definite shape of sort of darker shadow in that brow area. So I can leave that bit of white showing through here. The moment I'm doing a kind of like round and round motion with my pencil, just to kind of almost like polish in the kind of shadow, that sort of motion. You'll usually see there's a little bit of extra shadow towards the actual top of the edge of the eyelid. And then we can start getting, even if you can't see the pupil very clearly, you know it's going to be there. And pupils are always in the dead center of the iris. There's always the same amount of iris around them as there is pupil. So if you can't see it, you can kind of just guess where it should be. And then that comes in darker. And straight away, once you get that pupil in darker, it starts to bring the face a bit more to life. You start seeing that face as being a bit more of a person. Again, nostrils, I can definitely see they need to go darker. So I'm kind of starting to look now for maybe some of the darker areas on the face. At the moment, I'm still on a B pencil. I'm going to move on to some colors because I'm just going to work straight on top of the color with some, to get some dark, sorry, top and top. I'm going to work straight on top with the color on top of the pencil. There we go. There's a definite crease I can see in this eyelid here that comes above the eyelid. She's got a line sort of running through, which is more obvious on this side. And then again, this area here is darker. And I'm going to come up into this. This brow is slightly darker. There's less light on it because it's got more shading on it. And just keep on thinking, is that bit dark? Do I need to go darker here? Where does that line of shadow come? A mouth is much darker on my one. The upper lip needs to come darker. And if you think about it, this is almost as dark in the photograph as her eyes are coming. And then under here, we can start building up the shadow. There's a very strong area of shadow there. The sort of veins in her neck are slightly brighter. So at the moment, I can leave those. I'm going to come back and sort of work on them a bit more, but that's just sort of giving all these sort of areas of shadow in. And that's, again, just taking that a bit darker. So we're starting to see a bit more modeling of the face coming in through. I'm going to start using some colors because I can get darker with them. So I'm choosing a brown pencil at this point. Obviously I'm working from black and white photo. So it's not going to be, I can choose the color range. I'm not going to go for a strictly kind of realistic color range. So I'm just now working some brown over the top here. And I quite like the way, because you've got the darkness that the pencil's given you. So this is going to start to add some depth to the color. It means that I can, where I've got sort of intermediate shade, I can bring the brown up in over the white paper, and that starts to add quite a nice sort of subtle color variation without having to change everything too much. And then I can start to thicken up her eyebrow just with that brown where it sort of comes through. And then up here again, underneath here, if I want to get some darker shadow, if I now feel that I want to push that shadow a bit darker, you can try using a cool color. So I've got a dark blue here. In contrast to the brown, it's a very similar strength, very similar tonal depth, but with adding a little bit of blue in, that immediately gives the impression that that shadow is deeper and darker, even though, you know, if you were to draw a bit of blue and a bit of brown and then turn it black and white so you could see its tonal value, they would be very, very similar. But when you're using color, to use that extra bit of coldness in the color, that blue, that really starts to give that soft shadow a bit more soft, dark, and a bit more oomph. So if I want to go in darker again, I can use my blue just to sort of bring that to give it more power, to give it more strength. So particularly where she's got her pupil, I want to get that darker. And I'm just going to grab a pencil sharpener and sharpen this so I can get a nice sharp edge on that. That's trouble when you you always find you need to sharpen a pencil because you haven't been near it for ages. Or the last, no one ever finishes drawing and then sits there religiously sharpening their pencils, which is probably what we should do, so they're ready for next time. But as no one does that, you always find like we have to sharpen during the drawing. So I'm just going to work that blue into that pupil. So although we know empirically that the pupil is probably black, just by adding that dark blue, that's going to increase. Now, at the moment, I've left that sort of patch of grey pencil just to be almost like a highlight, even though it's not very white. And I'm just going to reduce that a bit so it doesn't look like she's got cataracts, and then make sure that that pupil's quite dark above it. But I've just left a tiny fleck of white in that eye, or sort of grey tone in that eye, and it just helps to kind of give it. If you look at the eye, if you've got a really strong white highlight and you've kind of missed it or you've gone too far, this is when white pens are the absolute savior, because you can come back and add some white detailing later, which you may do at the end, because it does really help to bring things to life. So if I come and look at this, I'm looking at this eye now. Again, I can see there's some really dark shadow. I'm going to put some brown. I come back to my brown. See, you should keep. I must listen to myself occasionally and keep both eyes going stage for stage, because then you forget. Otherwise, you do what I did then, and I nearly forgot that we had brown on there first. So there you go. That's a little lesson demonstrated admirably by me there. So I'm going to add some brown into the socket to begin with, and I'm going to take that brown up into the brow area. There's a little bit of light there, so I'm going to leave some of that being the sort of light tone, that sort of grey pencil, but there's definitely dark tone coming in here. So let's strengthen that up a bit. And again, I can see when I look at her eye here, you've got a little light bit just underneath her eye, and then a dark sort of sliver of shadow coming underneath, because funny enough, even though it's quite small, the bottom eyelid, the thickness of the skin around your eye does protrude a bit, and it will catch the light, and it's quite fascinating to see those sort of details. And then once I've got, I'm going to put more brown into this side. And then I'm going to come in with my blue like I did on this side. So again, this little area here, that's going to be really dark. So let's get my blue, my cold blue coming in to there. And then I'm going to come up into that crease and just work some of my blue in. And although you're thinking, oh, well, you know, I'm working on top of a lot of pencil, I have to kind of really make the effort to make the colors show through. And yes, you do, but it also allows you to build up these layers of tone, because you actually have to keep on going over them and keep looking back and referring to them and seeing, is that working? Is that working? And I find this approach sort of really helps. It's almost like sculpting the picture out of the paper. You're kind of building up these layers, and then you need to think of ways to get areas darker that you might just get them darker. You've got to think of ways to show light, and it sort of, it makes you push kind of your ideas and push the drama of your response. And I think a lot of the time when you're drawing a face like this, if you can increase or exaggerate what's going on to a little bit of a degree, not cartoonishly, but I mean with the intensity of the shadow and the contrast, it really helps to kind of model the face. So I'm now looking at the shadow next to her nose here. I can see a definite little swirl of shadow that's coming across, and there's a very light bit that comes across, because when you get the bridge of your nose here between the eyes, there is like a little dip as the nose starts to recede into the forehead before the forehead juts out. So you tend to get a little bank of shadow like that kind of coming across the bridge of her nose. And again, up here, so you can see on this picture here, we've got this little area of white just above her. I'll bring this a bit closer in case the camera so you can see it. You can see she's got this little area of white kind of here, and then we get the shadow. So in the same way, we can slightly sort of exaggerate the feel of that just by putting our brown shading on top of that pencil, but leaving that quite white above her eyebrow, and then coming up into the hairline like that. So we're just we're definitely still, it's those little shapes you need to look out for, those little moments that of which seem very subtle, but they can actually really change the shape of a face quite a lot. And if you've got the sort of the reference points that the carbon paper has given you into position, then you can kind of like, you know, where you're looking back, you've got a guide or like a grid to kind of see where you're coming from. And then this area here kind of goes into that swathe of hair. She's got some shadow in her hair, and her hair here, which again is quite a difficult thing to say. But this is when you can start thinking about changing the kind of line that you're going to use. So not just the round and round smoothing line, but maybe some flicky lines with the blue to give that some shade. And you can start to see there's like a sort of arc of shadow. And this time I'm going to use flicky lines. I can come up here to where she's got a sort of, you can see where her hair is kind of sprouting up here. On a completely, not maybe unrelated, but side note, listened to the radio today to a lady talking about she's an excellent wig maker. She's built a career making wigs for film, stage, and for famous people. And she was talking about how you put all the hairs into the hair, because this area here in a wig is so difficult to get naturalistic, because this is where the hair is individually sprouting out of your head, and cheap wigs always tend to have fringes. Or if you want a wig to make like this, she says it takes her a day, and she individually places each hair into the wig cap to create the feeling of the hair coming out of the scalp. So you can see, you can kind of get the feeling of that. So that's why I mention it, because you've got all these, this is where the hairs are sprouting, so they often catch the light and you get that sense of them moving kind of out of the face. So, you know, I like to bring you interesting snippets that I've heard in my week. So I'm just coming back to this eye, because I can see this, for me, this shape here, I think is really strong, where you've got this pool of highlight on her brow bone, and then this sort of like quite strong curved shape of shadow next to it. So I'm just going to slightly increase the power of that with a bit of blue pencil. And then I'm going to go to my brown pencil and just start working that in underneath. So the shading is there, but it doesn't have the depth of the cool shading that the blue gives me. There's a bit of shadow on this side of her face here, where we've got that in. And I'm going to test and see how much of this carbon line we can smudge out. Not very much. It likes to linger. That's fine. We'll just work with it. But if you can, I might try and take a little bit of that out, just reduce its impact. If you get a line that you can't take out, well, the only thing what you can do is to then increase some of the shading around it so that you can blend it in a bit later. So again, I'm going to start coming here with some sweeps of hair. And I can come down. If I come down, we'll come down this side here. I'm seeing, if you look, you can see here, there's almost like this bubble of light there, and that's where her cheekbone is kind of protruding like that. So again, look and see, has your character got an area you can really strongly, you can see that shape. So if you see that shape, you can slightly, if you're aware of it, you can slightly exaggerate it. So you can bring that shading, keep it light to begin with so that you can see how it looks. You might not need to go any darker. If you need to, I'm working down into the carbon line. I'm going to just increase the volume of that line there, because I want to blend that line a bit more into her face. So you can see I'm just blending that line in there. But I've got this sort of like curve of shadow that I'm seeing, and I can kind of, it's making me look at where it is, making me see what it's doing. I can come in and I've got somewhere to reference it so I can see. And then here at the side of her mouth, we've got that shadow line. So I'm going to build that up a bit. And down here onto the side of her mouth here, it kind of like meets into that triangle where we're sort of getting that feel in. And she has got a hollow cheek, because that's what age does to people. But, you know, it does reveal the strength and the beauty in her bone structure. And oh, if we could all have bone structure. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Zoom decided to throw me out, and I'm back. So what was I doing? I was just looking at this line around the side of her face, just trying to build up the shadow. And I think I was just saying, if only we could all have a bone structure this good when we get older, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? So I can see that as I come down here, this is where we get a big area of shadow in here. Her neck is going to be somewhere around here. For mine, it's sort of not, it's quite obscure. I can't quite see where the neck is going, but I'm going to kind of guess that it's somewhere around there, or sort of like, now that I've got something, I can see kind of roughly where I think it ought to be. So that's very dark. So I'm going to come in with that blue pencil again to sort of get some of that shading in. And against the hair as well, we've got hair here, but it's really shadowed. So again, I'm going to use that blue to come in and whisk that hair along. I've got an area of shade here in the hair. There's definitely, if I bring this line out, I can see I've made a mark. I've got sort of like a swirl of hair kind of in here. This is obviously slightly hidden from the light, so it's got a bit more shadow to it. It's kind of keeping the light. So again, I'm just going to whisk some shading lines through here in a combination of blue and brown. That's the word I was looking for. And then, so now these, where I'm leaving the white hairs become, or the sort of patch of highlight, it's kind of catching the light. It's becoming something that's picking up a highlight. So same on this side here, I can see with this area of hair, I've got almost like again, like a sort of long elongated, or like a sort of fish shape of shadow on this side of the hair. I'm looking over here, you can see where that comes in. And then quite close to that, as we work our way up, we can see there's some more kind of shapes in this area. And I'm just using thin lines rather than round and round shading, because I'm trying to give the impression of hair and the impression of it falling and being many strands rather than being blocks or smooth skin. So then I've got these lines coming through here, and there's this very strong shape here again below there, almost like, because you've got hair in a plait, it's almost like the hair is starting to move around and plait itself kind of in there. So that starts to give that kind of in and out feel. Again, this area here is here on her. This needs to get really dark. We need to get a lot more tone. So I'm going to go straight in with blue again on this side, working up underneath her jaw, kind of sculpting that in. And almost, if you imagine the chin line, you know that the line is kind of going from the neck up and then out the chin. So if you kind of almost do your lines so they're kind of that shape, if I'm doing exaggerating, but can you see how using that sort of curve like that just starts to indicate that you've got a curve there? So I'm sort of slightly flicking my lines. Like, they don't have to be as flicky as hairlines. You can do sort of like your curling round and round kind of pencil motion, but you can sort of bring it up in a kind of curve so that you can find that edge. And then I'm going to come in, I want to blend it into that very dark line that I've got in to get that contrast against her hair. So I want to try and push that blue right into that carbon line to kind of make it dark. You can get carbon paper in a whole range of colors, I should probably mention. So it may be more suitable. If you like this method or you want to do more of it, you might have a subject that you think needs like a red or a blue or something. You might find you can even get it on yellow, so you can then work onto dark paper surfaces. So it's quite versatile stuff. As you come to her sort of chin area here, I know we've got this big carbon line here, but we've got this area of dark. I'm going to swap to brown. And I'm going to bring, to start off with, I'm going to bring that shading up into her chin area and across. This is where you want to keep it really quite smooth, more sort of round and roundy motions, really, because if you do anything that's too liney or scribbly, it is going to look like a beard. And, you know, we ideally still culturally don't want a beard. It's a shame, actually, because having in the past worn a fake moustache, I can honestly say that I really suit facial hair. It's just a damn shame that, you know, I don't quite feel confident enough to whack on a nice handlebar moustache when I go out. I think it's a shame, you know, but there we go. But yeah, having dressed up in a costume, I can say I look very good with a moustache and a set of mutton chops, you know, and it doesn't help hide, you know, hide a wrinkly neck, a nice full beard. It's quite good. Right. So I'm going to come in here now. I can sort of see where that sort of browny kind of is showing. I can then come back in with my blue and again, just work over the top, just kind of like almost like you're making little sort of balls, or I think almost like sort of a cloudy kind of feel, just working that over the top. So we're blending that darker color in to the lighter color. Sorry, no, the dark color, I just said the dark, isn't it? Is it around? And I come down the side of her neck, I can see those prominent tendons in her neck, which we're not going to shy away from, because we're going to say that, you know, A, she's incredibly beautiful, and B, age is an absolute gift that we should treasure and celebrate and never never be ashamed of. Wear our years with pride, ladies. And indeed, gentlemen, wear our years with pride. And then there's a little bit of light, and then as it comes, her skin comes down to disappear into her jacket. That's where it gets a bit darker again. Now, of course, the jacket is very, very dark. The jacket we're going to do when we get to it, we're going to really, you know, we might put a different color, and we're definitely going to make that really powerful, because we need it to contrast with this area of skin a little bit, because even though it's dark, the skin is not as dark as clothing. You may find in your picture that you've got somebody with bright clothing that is sort of different tonal value, but you just need to make an assessment about that sort of coming through, right? So we've still got this area around her mouth. We've got the area which has the line in it. So I want to come in under lip, have a look at the under the lower lip area of your subject. You should probably see that there is going to be some shadow. And again, you probably don't have if you've got someone with very full and prominent lips, they may well have a lot of shadow in that lip section, but even then they're going to have quite a dark shadow just underneath that lip, and it's that shadow that really helps to model the lower lip shape. You almost don't in many photographs, you won't see the lower lip in huge as much as you're seeing the shadow that forms that lower lip. So I'm just getting in that quite dark here. I know we've got this line from the carbon paper. I don't think I'm going to take a little bit, not all of it out, but just reduce its impact on the sides with a little bit of discreet erasing. There we go. So and the same on this side. But because we've used that shape of the chin bone that's underneath, it doesn't look completely wacky, because it is the shape that's going on under there. So it sort of starts to indicate that shape, that it's sort of fulling around there. So this area here, if I look between the two sides of the model's mouth, this side here is definitely darker than this side, and there's a stronger line coming off the corner of her mouth on that side. So therefore I can think, right, I can build up a bit more brown of my sort of mid-tone shade into this side. Just again, soft round and round kind of movements. And that shade is coming a little bit into her chin area as well. So I can take where I've got this line here, where we've made that quite strong, let's again increase that using that brown pencil just to bring the shading up under here and take it back into that blue, because we want to build up a little bit of the darkness on this side. I'm going to do a bit more shading up onto her face here, because I can see there's more that needs to come under here, but we're just doing her mouth now, so I won't dodge up and down too much. So we're just going to see there's an area of quite strong shadow at the side of her mouth there. It makes a kind of dimple. Then if you look really closely, I know you're looking at a different model, but have a look and see where the shadow comes on her mouth, because in my one, I've got this very strong area of upper lip shadow, and then there's a very discreet area of shadow just coming down on top of it. So I'm going to start by putting that in. So it's a little bit of my browny, softy shadow coming across the top of her upper lip. You might have something similar on your model. Sometimes you'll see a really strong line of light on top of someone's lip. But to make that work, you're going to want to shade above that line, leaving it like almost like a micro white moustache on top of the lip. So have a look for those. So once I've got that little bit of soft shadow in above there, I now want to make that upper lip darker. So I'm going to come in and with my blue shadow and darken off that upper lip, and then that shadow that I've used above the lip isn't too strong. It's just indicating that the mouth is starting to curl away and curve down into the mouth section. And then there's this sort of area of shadow here, and we've got quite a strong line kind of coming down here where we're getting some pull from the developing wrinkle kind of around there. And then this area below here, I can see that's sort of like some shadow that needs to come into it. But hopefully we're seeing, what I'm trying to get you to keep thinking about is the way that the face models, the way that it pulls in and out, the way that the things that are coming forward, they get hit by light, they're brighter. The things that are not getting light, they're much darker, and it's that we really see. So I'm even going to come in with my dark blue into that under lip area. I just want to increase that, and I hope just by doing it, you can see how that's giving her bottom lip more protuberance, giving it a bit more presence like that. And then I still want to get that neck a bit darker. So I'm going to come in again with some darker blue down here. If I want to get a bit darker, I might have to introduce a third colour. Excitement, excitement of the audience. Gasps, what third colour can we add in? Well, we'll see. So there's a few shapes in her hair. Hair is getting down here. It's getting really quite dark because it's much more shadowed and it's much more textural. So lots of textural lines can come in here. Really, we want a black background. It's quite hard to do with this, but we'll see we get a bit further on. But there's definitely an area of shadow here, and you get a bit more roughness of the hair texture here. So I'm going to keep on working that area, but I'm using quite rough crisscrossy kind of lines. I don't want them to be too smooth here because it's just indicating that bit of texture that's coming through here. This area here, that's going to come down into it. So we're getting, you can actually see on this one, she's got a very bright white wiggle of hair coming through here. So have a look and see where you can see a highlight in the hair for your model of drawing. And then to make that brighter, what you've got to do is make the surrounding paper darker, because we can't get brighter than the white paper. So I can just work in some shadow around that area, or some brown tones, just to start making this white shape stand out a bit more. If you've got a model with very dark hair, you might want to be thinking, right, I've got to think of just where the moments where I get a highlight. And then in between that, you could almost treat it like the initial drawing we did with the face, just block in all the dark as a mid-tone, and then keep looking for the where you get darker shadows, where you get even darker moments, and where you get bright moments. So kind of treat it again as a sort of modeling exercise, or an exercise of sort of pushing the darkness back and the lightness, and seeing where the lightness needs to come. So this line up to here, I've got this carbon line here, that needs to come dark all the way up there because it's just showing that little bit of white. And I'm going to darken up that bottom section there again, and then this is going to get really dark in here, and this is almost fading out into her clothes, so it's getting really quite dark. And up here we've got some few flicks of hair, flicks of shadow coming through the hair like that, so you can just introduce those. Right, I'm just going to grab a sip of water, and then we're going to tackle her nose area to kind of bring that all up, and then we can think about some clothing colouring. Lovely, right, that's better. Wet the whistle. Okay, so again, nose. Well, we know that the nostril area is, particularly this angle, is going to be the darkest thing we have. So you'll probably find the same thing whatever human face you're drawing, you've probably got a darker nostril than anything else. So see if you can see the shape of the nostril. They're usually a kind of kidney shape or a kind of crescent shape, but sometimes depending on the angle of the face, they can be quite a different shape. See if you can see that shape and relate it to the mark that you've made on the carbon paper, and then you can just darken it down a bit using your darkest sort of shading color. Often you will have a bit of light going up inside the nose. Depends how big you're working as to whether you're going to actually see that or not, but that just starts to give that nose some sort of presence. Again, I'm going to just try and soften that arc that I drew in the carbon paper with a little bit of, it doesn't have to come a lot, because again, it is sort of there. It's just that I want to just slightly blend. So I'm just taking like the edges out. If you rub, a few strokes across, you can certainly lessen that off. So it just becomes that little peak. And you'll notice, if you can sort of see, there's definitely a patch of shadow, as it were, in the middle underneath section of the nose, where that carbon mark sort of is. So I can come in with my brown pencil first and just almost put like a ball of brown shading in underneath that underneath the very tip of her nose, and then that shading comes down. Again, look for that shape. You might have a very different shape to mine depending on the size of the nose you're working on, but there's probably going to be that shadow there because the light is coming this way, it's coming from above, and it's going to leave that little bit of this underneath the tip of her nose, and all this underneath section is going to be more shady. I always think of it sometimes as, if you cut a mushroom in half long ways or through the sort of north to south, you can see, you get the sort of gill. It's almost like that kind of shape, I always feel, because you've got the sort of like the curved of the gills coming in of the sort of hood coming either side. So think about that kind of mushroomy shape. She's got this, my model's got a bit of shadow, again, just coming down on the top of that philtrum line, which is just coming down through there. Then I've marked the sides of her nose in carbon again. So I'm going to just bring that down. And if I look just above that, there's a very light shadow, sort of in that middle zone that's kind of coming up from that end there. So you can just see a little bit of it. And then again, up here, I'm just seeing a little bit of shadow on that side. And then under here, again, this comes darker. And I can see light just on the edge of the nostril flare. So I don't want to go completely dark, but again, to contrast that up, this carbon mark, I'm going to blend that into the shadow area that I've got here. And I might need to extend that then to kind of get some, to sort of work that in to get the contrast to sort of work in. As I said before, we need to get some more shadow. I can, on my one, if I'm looking and looking again, I notice there's a little line of extra, like of a skin crease of shadow kind of through there and running through here. And then I've got shadow underneath this, the eye shadow under this eye falls much more, falls down her face more. There's more shadow encroaching on this side of her face than there is on the other side. So I can keep just building that shadow up a bit more. And if I sort of step back and I look again, I'm almost saying this whole side is quite dark. I've got some dark kind of coming in here. So again, I can just work that in, just go sort of slowly. Maybe this shape here is now looking a little bit too strong. So again, I can come in and blend some pencil into that edge. Very, very light pencil work using the brown color, but just sort of floating it over the surface just to slightly soften that point here. And as I come down towards that shadow line, I'm going to make that slightly stronger so that it blends that line in. And maybe up here as well, where I've got that carbon line, let's blend that into the hairline a bit more, so it's sort of starkly kind of working. And again here, I want to get this a bit darker. So I think I'm going to come in with my blue and just along this edge where I've got the carbon line, just get some shadow in underneath there. I want to put a bit more underneath her eye and around up here. And then I can get into this eye is a lot darker. So let's get that a bit darker. And I can just, again, with my round and round blending pencil movement, get that in and coming down the side of her face. I just put a little bit of extra shadow in. I don't want to get too dark on the end of the nose or it's going to start looking like a third nostril. So we don't want to start getting that looking in too dark. Right, so let's think a bit more about hair and clothing. I'm just going to move it over a little bit so I can just see this side of her hair. The camera's not going to see that, but I can see on this side. So again, I'll move it a bit. So I'll just talk about where I'm shading so you can see. So again, if you look at your model's hair as if it was sort of areas of light and shade to begin with. So if I drew a line through here on my one, you can see how it's actually quite a strong highlight area of hair that's just coming there. And then if I look on this side is a much darker look with all this sort of texture in it. So if I think about that with relationship to my picture, this line here, this is where it's kind of being catching the light. So everything on the other side of it, that needs to kind of soften and darken down again. So I'm just going to get my pencil and my brown pencil. And again, like I did with the face, I'm just shading very lightly, but just taking all of this darker so that we're starting to get a feel of the modeling of that hair, you know, so that we're seeing it in the biggest area of light and shade, or the most sort of simplified area of light and shade that you can see to begin with, coming down in here. And same on this side, I can see, and I've already started to put some shading, but I'm just going to do, again, sort of darken that whole lower section down, just to kind of work that in. So I'm seeing that as kind of like a big area of shade. And then I can think about, right, okay, so I knew there's this very dark point in here where the hair's all kind of like working up into her plait. So it's almost like an arrow shape coming up into that shading in here. So I can then darken this up, you know, make it sort of darker and start to think about the texture and the direction. So the hair's kind of coming in to this sort of area if you want to, you can obviously spend a lot of time, you know, if you've got complicated hairstyle, then you can kind of work it a bit more. But even if you don't, you know, you don't have to do every single detail. You can kind of give the hint that the hair is kind of coming into a plait or whatever arrangement. It's almost like a sort of zigzag of shadow kind of coming down that plait. And what we're seeing is then leaving the white paper coming through to be where it's catching the highlight, and it's sort of again coming down that side. I'm going to swap to brown. I'm just going to put in again an area of shadow, and you can decide, you know, you can keep going back and keep on adding more and more detail and more texture, or you can leave areas of your drawing softer and more unfocused, because that's completely a stylistic choice that you can make and decide what you want to do with that. You know, you don't always have to have every single bit in detail. You can give impressions of some areas and focus in on some detail. And all of that, again, is about creating the language of your image, because every week I say this, and I'm going to say it again, a portrait is not just a photograph of the person. It's not just an exact, or I don't think it should be just about being an exact replica of the person in front of you. It should somehow speak a bit more about the things that are invisible about the person, about the character. And you might decide there's a way of showing that the invisible through the visible by what you leave in, what you leave out, what you focus on. So there we go. So I'm just making this, I'm going back over here with the brown to give this sort of like a darker kind of texture. And then again, a darker shade, sorry. And then again, on the outside edge where this is starting to disappear away into the blackness, just by using more shade. So I'm keeping this area quite light to begin with, but using more shade, that will, oops, she's fallen down. Again, it's the second hand, reusing bits of masking tape, leaving their stick. Just adding those extra bits of shade in there, so this area is staying quite sort of white. We've got that little sprout of hair that we've looked at already. So again, you usually have a hairline moment where your line is breaking forth from the hairline. And then coming down here, again, we're seeing there's a dark background really coming through that hair there. So as it comes again towards the edge, it's being darkened down in because there's just less hair, it's more of a halo of hair, and you're seeing kind of more background coming through. And again, you might decide to get, you know, if you've got a person with wild hair, you can exaggerate it, and you can give it sort of, you know, you could do all sorts of things. You could draw birds nesting in it, you know, depending on what you feel about their hair and what they feel about it, and whether they think it was funny or whether they'd be upset. I think it'd be funny, but then somebody might be really offended if you did that. So I'm not recommending you draw a bird's nest on someone's head. But, you know, this is all the fun of portrait making. This is where you can bring all these kind of elements that we've been looking at together. So up this side, the hair is very, very stark white because it's where the highlight is coming. So really what I'm doing here is almost thinking about drawing in the background and having the white hairs kind of showing in comparison against it. If you want to start getting some background into a portrait, if you feel it helps, it's going to help your portrait, you can use exactly the same colors you've been using, but to get that feeling of it being a backdrop, try using a very different stroke. So if I come in here and I'm just using a very regimented vertical line, that immediately becomes a background because of the style of line that I'm using, because it's a different contrasting line to that, all the ones that I've used. It's saying to my viewer, this is background. It is not a blue Mohican sticking on top of her head. It's going to be background because I'm using these straight directional, more mechanical kind of lines. So even if I basically just build up a bank of shading using these lines, the line will still kind of be through, and it will start to give that sense of background. And I'm only doing that, even though it's the same colors as I've been using, it's just changing the shape of line that I'm using, the quality, the style of line. You don't have to do a straight line. You could do it at an angle, you could do it as a curve, but you could do any line you want. But if you make it different from the lines you've been using on her face, or the shading technique that you've been using on her face, it will read as a background and not as if she's got something stuck on top of her that's sort of adding to it. So I want to think about her clothing. Now, obviously, I've got a black and white image that I'm looking at. You may have a color image, you may have a color in mind. I'm going to start off again just by blocking it in as an area of shadow. And you may well have a collar or a neckline or something, and that is all going to be part of the person that you're drawing. You know, the clothes. Early in this series, we were looking at the portraits of Elizabeth I, and I was saying how the clothes that she was seen in were far more important than what her face looked like. I'm not saying that's the case in all portraits, but the personality of the person that you're drawing is, unless they've been dressed by a strange, you know, so for a fashion shoot, which way, you know, so they may be sort of putting stuff they wouldn't normally wear. If you're drawing someone, you know, you're drawing their clothing. The clothing is kind of part of what they've chosen, how they've chosen to present themselves, you know, as much as the way they've chosen to brush their hair or, you know, have a haircut or style themselves. So it is kind of like, you know, quite part of the personality you're trying to get across. So maybe your person is renowned for wearing flowery shirts, or they have a particular pair of a particular scarf they wear, or a t-shirt or glasses or something that's going to be very iconic to them. So think about that. If you're doing a portrait, what would you put them in? What would you dress them in? You know, would you say to them, oh, can you put on that dress with the pink flowers, because I always think of you in that dress? And that becomes part of how they present themselves. So I'm just having a quick sip of water again. Now I'm going to introduce another color for this jacket eventually, but what I'm doing is laying down like a foundation of color. So if you use the same, foundation of tone. So if you use these same blue colors that we've been using to indicate the very darkest of tones on our drawing, I'm going to put that down first, almost like a kind of base coat or an undercoat of color. I'm not going to do all the pattern on her jacket because that will take quite a long time, but I'm going to start with just putting that in, and then it is basically a little bit lighter because, again, you think about the way her body works, this is shaded by her face and her neck, so it's much darker. This area of chest is again slightly protruding, so it helps us to get that mid-tone. If you put a mid-tone there, it's sort of you can see that slight difference of the way the body is kind of moving again forwards towards us, so it's catching a bit of light there. So let's see what happens when we put a color on top of that now. So we're going to change the color. I immediately want to put her in a red jacket. I think it would suit her. It's such a strong image. I want a red. I feel that the red would be quite appropriate. I think also it's that I'm just looking for red pencil, which way you can't see my hands. Well, it's also this Mandarin collar, which is called a Mandarin collar, and it is based on traditional Chinese jackets. So and red would have been a kind of imperial color. So all of these things are making me search desperately for the red pencil that is hiding in my pencil drawer. All the red pencils have ganged up on me and are hiding at the back. I finally got an orangey one. Now that's a bit orange pink. All right, well, I'm going to go for this orangey one. It's sort of nearly red. It's like a dark orange. The red pencils clearly heard me coming and ran for the hills, taking the masking tape with them. So I'm just going to lay some orange down over this, and straight away this orange has become darkened by the blue underneath, and it's quite good for using the contrasting color. So again, I'm probably exaggerating whatever color this jacket would be in, but to get that effect, it really helps to get it to be shaded, because you can, of course, you know, work away create the effect just by put the orange down first and putting shadow on top. I've just always found undercoating, as it were, with the shadow really helps. So I can just then kind of go over the top with the orange, and then I'm getting a really good impression of how the jacket is looking or the clothing is looking, and I can go back and adjust that accordingly. So again, I'm just going to come over the top with this orange, so you can see where I'm not doing any particular different tonal pressing. It's just that where it's got the blue under it, it's much more tonal, it's much more shaded down, and where I'm working where I've got less blue under it, it's just coming out lighter and more orangey. And really, when you're thinking about shadow in color, it's not so much that it's dark, it's that it's less of the color that it starts off being. That's a very confusing way of putting it, but you know, when something is dark, it's not just dark orange, it's less bright orange, if that makes any sense. But thinking about that, I find sort of helps, because you can sort of think, right, so I need to get less orange into the orange is going to come in the highlights, but it's definitely not going to be in the shadow. In the shadow, I want this color that's sort of like a blend of blue and orange together, which are opposite colors. If I was being more precise, you could do things like leaving some white paper showing to indicate that her hair is kind of tracking across that a bit, but I haven't done that. We can go back. We might get the chance and time to do some white pen work on top to kind of, really bring this to life. So think about the color. If you've got somebody who's wearing really pale colors, then just try and pick out the slight tonal differences, because where the fabric is falling into a crease, where it's maybe where you can see the shape of the body underneath, anything like that. And as I said, if you can exaggerate it, because it helps to kind of, if you ramp up the drama, it just helps to kind of model the image and make it pop out of the surface. So now I've got this in here, I can see there definitely needs to be some more darkness and more blue tone coming into this edge. And again, this hair, I think this sort of area of hair, that needs to come darker in here. So it's definitely disappearing in behind her neck. It's hard to see, but there's probably some shadow just almost being cast up, as it were, from the jacket. So any front light is being blocked by the jacket coming into her neck. So just increasing the bit of shadow, maybe just around the top edge of her jacket there, again, helps to definitely push it in front of her neck area. And then coming down here, this area here, this is really dark. So I almost want to, again, work over that with the blue to kind of darken it down again. So just have a look, and as I just keep thinking, can I exaggerate that bit of shadow? Can I make it stand out more? Because now you've got the base on, you don't feel so bad about kind of adding to it and ramping it up a bit, because you've got, when you've got something on the paper, you can kind of see more easily where you need to model it, where you need to push it backwards and forwards. So let's just, again, darken this area down here. And then you can see, right, the hair here, this section here, blending into this jacket, it's almost tonally the same. So I'm going to bring a bit of shadow along here, leaving some of that white. And again, darkening it down under here. And again, I'm just going to build up just some texture more into that, where I'm just seeing that plait disappearing down in here. That I've got that very white area of hair, that's got to stay bright and white. And so to do that, I'm going to, put some extra shading into it under here, and then coming back under here again, ramping up that shadow. This area here, I still think this neck on this side, there's too much light here. I'm seeing this sort of ball of light here. Whereas look on this side, there's no light at all. So again, just keep on looking at your source material. Your source material, you don't know, it's surprising how the more you look at it, the more you will see, and the more you can decide, no, I can get that darker. And some bits you won't be able to judge until you've got this far in the drawing. Like again, this sort of the left hand tendon on her neck, I want to push that darker as well, so it's less obvious than the right hand one, and that space in between is darker. So I know I need to push all that back. Just so I do think it's almost like you have to sort of think of it almost like you are sculpting, that you are kind of, imagine it's a piece of, you want to push it backwards, you want to pull it forwards, and you do that with your tone as it comes down here. I think this tone between her neck here, that can get between the jacket collar stand, that can get a little bit darker as well. And then again, up on this side, there's too much light on this side. I need to knock that back. I need to get that away a bit to get that sense of shading. And up underneath her chin, again, really dark. Just sort of coming up there. And again, you won't be able to see that until you've got something like the jacket in, because that allows you to kind of pull and you've got something to compare it to then, haven't you? So again, on this side, we want to keep this hair, there is some whiteness under here. So maybe the jacket needs to come a bit darker, so that where the hair is sitting against it, we just want to have a little bit of lightness in it. So almost just come into blue and then mixing the sort of orange there, just to sort of blend in that sort of darker color. Now we're going to also start thinking now about how to ramp up some of the highlights. So although we've got some white paper highlights, we can actually get a bit more kind of impact with putting a little bit of different tone in. I hope this is going to come across. And I'm going to use a peach pencil to kind of blend into the brown. Again, as ever, with sort of peach, what color is it? I don't know, it's sort of like creamy, peachy, yellowy. So pale, a yellow would work, a sandy brown, just something that little bit paler. But I want to sort of slightly soften again into some of the sort of really highlight areas. So you can see it's this sort of like sandy pinky color. So now that I've got all my sort of tonal areas kind of sorted out, this is sort of working on the edge of where the brown hits the white paper, because I want to bring a bit more control into those areas. And also, again, because I'm using a yellow toned, peachy tone color, it immediately becomes warmer and more about highlight because it's a brighter, warmer color. I hope it's coming across on the camera. It may not be quite able to pick up because it's a relatively subtle thing that we're doing, but just sort of working. So on this side of her face, where it's darker overall, I'm going to take the highlights into this color so that the white highlights are more on this side of her face. So it will increase that sense of form. When I say modeling, I don't mean posing the camera. I mean the sort of the in and out, the modeling effect of the light on her face. It will increase the definition or the contrast. I think that's the word I'm grasping for. So I'm just working that paler color into some of the sort of areas. I don't know if I get a bit closer with the camera, if you'll be able to see that. If I can get closer, I think that might just let us see it a bit better. Yeah, you can just start to see it. I think I can see it fine, but obviously it's a bit harder. So I'm kind of, again, starting on the brown side, just to sort of, again, warm that. And then I'm just taking that warmth, just sort of going round and round into that area. So I'm slightly, it's like creating a mid-tone, but like it's really sort of like a light tone, isn't it? But it's like saying, right, we're not just going to use the paper as the white, we're going to explore the highlights a bit more. So again, on this side of her mouth, when there's sort of like just something that's not totally highlit, I can sort of color that in there. And then again, around her nose on this side, so that the stark white is left very much for the strong highlight areas. And again, up on her forehead, I'm going to bring that in. And even if you're drawing whatever sort of racial background your model is, if you're drawing someone with a dark skin tone, just keep making yourself look and see where these moments happen, because you'd be surprised at, you know, how much variation there is in these areas of shadow. And you won't be able to see that until you've been looking at it for an hour or more, like you've been looking at it now. And we've not sort of thought, gosh, I'm staring at the same thing. But every time we keep looking, but every time we're looking, we're getting more information in, we're sort of reevaluating what we see in front of us. And that's why it's just the effort of practicing and doing these things that's going to improve what we see and how we decide to represent them in our drawings. And again, it's why I come back to using these things like the carbon to give us a structure to work to. It takes away the pressure of seeing an image that comes out a bit wonky and going, well, that doesn't, you know, I don't even know who that's supposed to be. It looks like nothing I want. And then you get fed up because you can't, and then you never get beyond that first stage. If we can get a structure in place, something that we can refer to, something like a grid or something that helps us plan our drawing, then we're not panicking about, you know, are the eyes too far apart, or they, you know, and even if they are still not absolutely like our model is, it's usually, to begin with, it's going to be closer than if we do it without the support. Then that allows us to get into concentrating on the tonal values and the shadow, because we can get past our concerns about whether or not, you know, their mouth is exactly the right, you know, exactly the right distance away from their nose. We've got more chance of getting there. And that's when we start to really look and look and look again at what we're doing, because we're tracing, we're trying to sort of like compare those areas of shadow and tone, and we keep looking and we keep seeing and we keep seeing. And really what we're doing is training our eyes to actually, to not just look, but to see what is there. And that's one of the key skills in drawing, because our blooming left-handed brain is going, oh, I know what a face looks like. It looks like this. I know that person. They look like this. And of course, the left-handed brain is drawing on memory the whole time to construct the face in front of us, because that's how we think. That's what we do. I can't remember whether I've said this before, but we don't actually see most of what happens around us, because our brains would just be fried if we had to actually see and acknowledge and analyze the information that's around us. So because our brain is always prioritizing danger or the things that we're looking for, it kind of has a memory of what should be where we are, because we mostly live our lives in the same sort of environments. So it kind of fills in a lot of what we see. And I was thinking of this earlier as I was storming around the kitchen, panicking because I couldn't find my right headphones to record the course, and swearing and shouting, getting really upset. That, of course, I can't find my headphones because my brain is actually still not very good at looking for things. It's still seeing the room as it thinks it is, not the room as it actually is. And this is what happens when we draw. Our conscious mind tells us, oh no, well, a face looks like this. And then, of course, we're not seeing what's actually there. And some of these shapes in the faces are really strange. They're really distorted looking. They're really weird patterns, but we don't normally look at them. We just accept that that's how they are. So this process, what I'm trying to get you to do, this is why I think it's a valuable teaching tool. This is why it's not going to change your drawing overnight, but if you keep practicing with it, it will support you just to keep on looking and looking and looking at what's in front of you and starting to analyze the relationships between things. And it's that exercise really of being able to concentrate on looking and seeing that is the most valuable thing about this, and which will support you in drawing more than anything. And of course, practice. You've just got to keep doing it. And if this makes it easier for you to practice, if this helps you to get more drawing done, that ultimately is what will improve your drawing. So, you know, this is why I think this is why I use this as a teaching method, because solely because I have seen the results for my own work. I feel that over the last 3 or 4 years, my own drawing ability has been supported to improve by using these methods. So I'm going to, hopefully you can just see that sort of yellow and it's really starting to add some warmth, and it's starting to soften some of the shadow areas. So I was sort of like doing it while I was talking, but I'm just kind of working over the top of the brown shading to kind of help to blend that in. If you keep going with this, if you were to add other more subtle variations of color and you just keep working over and over in the same kind of way, you can really build up this sort of quite smooth kind of like skin tone, this kind of feel over the top of what can be quite unusual colors. So even though you've got quite strong blue tones in this, if you then start almost working with your skin tone pencils, depending on whose skin tone you're drawing, but your caramel colors, your peach colors, your pinky colors, over the top of the shadow that you've got on in the blues, you find that you still start working towards a more naturalistic look, but you're keeping the intensity of the shadow. And that's what's important, because again, people often shy away from doing strength in their shadows if they're trying to go for natural colors, because they think, well, I can't work out what color that is. So if you get the shadows in first, even with quite a strong like blue tone like this, purple works really well on whiter skins, blue and burgundy work really well on darker skins. Then you can sort of work over the top with those pencils that are ubiquitously called skin tone, you know, when we should point out that it's not everyone's skin tone, but you know, in your caramels, your browns, your russets, all those kind of tones over the top. And then you, although you think, well, they're not going to change the color of what's underneath, but they kind of do, they kind of work over the top. And if they're good pencils, you can kind of keep blending those edges in, and you start to see that smooth, more kind of like skin-like, hopefully, surface developing around it. And then, so I mean, I've got this is my sort of yellow tone. If I can find a kind of pinky tone, this is slightly more peachy pinky tone, again, I can bring that on top. So, you know, I think sometimes people think when they're using color pencils, you kind of have to do it like painting by numbers. You know, you do an area and you do another area that sits next to it, and there's a perfect relationship between the two. Often it's a lot more like painting, in that you're building up layers on top of layers, and you're sort of you're changing the surface more and more subtly and delicately each time to kind of bring in these sort of other tonal colors. And that's why it's, if you can afford it, if you can, you know, if somebody asks you what you want for Christmas, a really good quality color pencil will give you that ability to layer and layer your colors. The cheaper ones tend to be too kind of oily, and you can't get them to sort of blend, or sort of waxy, I think can be hard to blend. The more expensive ones have the capacity to the softness that will let you to sort of like build up these layers almost a little bit more like using a paint stick. And you know, like I said, if you are lucky enough to have someone that's going to buy you a Christmas present this year, there's some great brands out there, and it's really worth getting some good ones. It's and equally, I've seen people do the most amazing drawings using simply a blue biro. So, you know, far be it from me to tell you what to buy. You can spend your money where you like to, but yeah, there is a certain kind of satisfaction in a tin of beautifully arranged color pencils. You know, they are, it's a bit like when you plant bulbs in the garden and you sit there imagining this beautiful flower show that's going to come up. Have you ever done that? You know, probably isn't ever quite going to make it out the way you were hoped, but there's a very satisfying moment of staring at them all, thinking of where they might take you. There is a thing on me anyway. So I'm just going to keep blending those in. We're sort of slowly heading, well, we're heading at the normal speed towards the end of the session, no more slowly or quickly than we normally do, but I'm sort of getting to the end of where I'm going to be in the picture. I'm going to just see if I can find a pale blue color, which I can. I'm going to bring some pale blue into some of the hair tones here in this sort of shadowed area, just to sort of where I've got the white, again, to a similar kind of idea. I want to introduce that color into the kind of white feel of her hair. So I've got, like, in this lower section where I know it's more shadowed, I can use that pale blue tone to kind of, again, be a highlight, but overall darken up the area so that it's got that sense of depth that I want to get in it. And again, just here, just to bring some tonal in. Into that hair area here. This side, again, this could probably use some pale blue, I think, just to blend into those darker shades. And again, as it disappears off behind, this is where we can have some blues, just to sort of help that sense of it moving backwards away from the light and into the background. And I think I'm going to just try and get her pupils a tiny bit darker. So what I could really use would be a black pencil, which I do have here. Again, is that black or is that, no, it's dark brown. Black pencils are fairly, they're even worse than red pencils. So if I go in my pencil box, there's no way the black pencil is going to bob to the surface, because you only get one black pencil and lots of other colors. So, so I think I'm going to not be able to get a black pencil. So I'm going to go for a little tiny bit of black pen, just to increase the darkness of that pupil. So I've got a little brush pen here, and I'm just going to come in and darken up that pupil, just leaving the center with a bit of light showing so that we've got that extra oomph. And I'm just leaving that. So it's not a white highlight as such, it's a gray highlight, but it's just adding that contrast into the pupil. And I hope you can see that, though it's quite a small detail, it does just increase the liveliness of her eye. And I'm just going to put a tiny bit of the darker tone around her eye, almost as if like an eyeliner, just where I've got the carbon mark. But again, just to take that a bit darker. So they are a bit strong. I'm going to reduce the light in this side down to a tiny point, because it was making her look slightly boss-eyed. I think that's better because I've got the light going in the same sort of direction. That's what we're after anyway. And I can add a little bit of kind of eyeliner in as well. I just want to increase this size of the eye a tiny bit, because I think I got it a little bit on small, but there we go. So I think that's just helps to bring her to life a bit. If I wanted to, I could use some white pen. I think that might look a bit over the top, but you know, I'm always one for going a bit over the top. So let me grab my white paint pen. And that's a Sharpie. That's the opposite of one. Here we go. Here's my white paint pen. And I'm just going to put a tiny dot of white into her eye there, just to add a little hint of that kind of wetness, so that it's just hopefully brings it to life a little bit. And again, that's always something you can do at the very end, and it just adds that little moment of light. So there we go. So that's our portrait for today. I could, of course, keep on going, blending the hair in, doing the background, all those kind of things, But that's where we're going to leave it for today. And I hope you can see that what I'm trying to do is give you that structure that the carbon tracing allows you, so you can really focus in on the shading and the modeling on the face, and improve your practice that way, rather than getting disheartened at the first kind of moment the face goes wrong. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed today's session.